Hi, I'm Tracy. I am one half of Coach Aligned. I'm a qualified counsellor, leadership coach, and recovering control freak. And if you are anything like me, you do not love waiting. You love clarity, certainty, you love resolution, and you love movement. But what happens when you can't? In 2012, I found myself living what looked like a dream on the surface, a new life in Bali. But beneath all of the sunshine, great coffee, slow pace, I was entering a season of coming home to myself. I was wrestling with identity, reflecting on scriptures that were really familiar to me with a completely different lens, trying to reimagine what it might mean to belong to God, to others, and to myself. I had released a role, my dream role. I'd stepped out of everything familiar, and I assumed that the new thing would show up really quickly, but it didn't. I was not prepared. Seriously, I was not prepared for, the fog, the disorientation, the ache of not knowing who I was without the labels that I'd always worn. And the realization that I was more attached to the layers of my identity connected to that role and how it had tethered me relationally in my community, my people, that hit really hard. It wasn't just about stepping away from work or responsibility, it actually felt like losing belonging. The liminal space exposed the depth of my attachments and invited me to reimagine my identity, not as something to be achieved, but as something to be received. What I thought would be this little short pause became a long, slow invitation, not to rush, to be present and to stay. That fog, as uncomfortable as it was, became holy ground, sacred ground. Because in the letting go, in the not yet, that this is where God does some of his most profound forming work. Now, in this series, we've been exploring thresholds, the sacred space between what was and what's next. And today we're focusing on perhaps the hardest space of all, the liminal space. Now, this word liminal comes from the Latin limen, which means threshold. It's the space between where you no longer where you were, but you're not yet where you're going. It's uncomfortable, unresolved, often very quiet. And here's the truth. Growth doesn't always come by moving forward. Sometimes it comes by learning to stand still, to hold the tension, to resist the rush, to stay present in the formation, in the fog. The liminal space is a place of surrender. And that surrender can feel like loss. Here's what entering the liminal space often involves. The first thing is it involves letting go without grabbing. You've released what no longer fits. It might be a role, a belief, maybe a relationship, a dream, but the temptation is to grab the next thing prematurely just to escape the discomfort. I had to learn that thresholds were less like a trapeze to grab and more like a tightrope to traverse. The liminal space isn't about leaping into what's next. It's about learning to walk slowly, carefully, with deep focus across what feels uncertain. The second thing is sitting with uncertainty. Liminality is marked by fog. You cannot force clarity. And that's part of the point. This is where faith grows in real time. We often equate progress with clarity, but in the liminal space, the invitation is to trust without a map. Uncertainty can feel like disorientation, but it's also fertile ground for transformation. When we resist the urge to control the outcome, we make room for deeper wisdom to emerge. Here, spiritual resilience is formed by not by knowing, but by staying grounded to what or who we trust. The next is learning to be led, not driven. Oh my gosh. Now, in the wilderness, Israel followed the cloud by day and fire by night, not a 5-year plan, as much as I love 5-year plans and have one for myself. But it's not the plan, it's the presence that leads. You might not have answers, but you do have access to presence, capital P. This is where you practice the art of release, not just of the past, but of your attachment to control, to certainty, and to speed, to movement. Being led means learning to listen in stillness than strategizing from fear. For example, regulating with a breath prayer when you feel overwhelmed and tempted to latch on to something that offers certainty, but lacks the quiet assurance of God's presence and purpose. These moments of spiritual regulation create space to reorient your heart towards trust, not control. They help you remain in step with God rather than rushing ahead of Him. It's less about productivity and more about posture. The pace of presence is often slower than the pace of culture, but infinitely more forming. Spiritually, the liminal space is where God does His deepest forming work. Think of Mary Magdalene outside the tomb, the empty space between death and resurrection. Think of Joseph in prison. Think of Jesus in the wilderness. Psychologically, this space mirrors what researcher William Briggs called the neutral zone, a necessary pause between old identity and new identity. And here's what's fascinating. According to Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, a neuroscience at Northeastern University, your brain is a prediction engine, and uncertainty creates a state of discomfort. Just know that. We're wired to fill in the blanks, but spiritual maturity is learning to hold space for mystery without forcing a resolution. So when the brain says, quick, fix it, fill in the blanks, figure it out, ruminate, come up with plans, the spirit says, sit, stay, be still, trust. So let's breathe here for a moment. Ask yourself gently, what am I being invited to release right now? Not just externally, but internally. Where am I tempted to rush, force, or fix something that just isn't ready yet? It's not time. What would it look like to honor this liminal space as holy ground? Download the threshold checklist if you haven't already. There's a section in there that helps you really identify what stage you're in and how to hold space with grace. There's a number of strategies there. Maybe your growth isn't in more doing, maybe it's going to be found in dwelling longer, staying longer. So, my friend, if you find yourself in the fog, can I encourage you, just sit with it a little while, stay. Not because staying is easy, but because it's holy. The liminal space is not a mistake, it's where God softens, shapes, and strengthens you for what's next. And in our next episode, we'll talk about that crossing over, how to discern the signs of new beginnings and step into them with courage. But for today, again, I want to encourage you to download the Thresholds checklist. The link's in the bio. Maybe leave a comment below or ask a question, and please subscribe. Subscribe. It's super helpful for us and helpful for you. We love hearing from you because presence and connection really matter to us. And transformation begins here, now, not when you move, but when you stay grounded. And so till next time, it's bye for now.